when we speak of Kundalini, and this is why many spiritual teachers, they dismiss altogether the validity of Kundalini experience when it is referred to or related to the process of full self-realization and the embodiment of pure consciousness. Because when we speak of Kundalini, we speak of the awakened prana, which was dormant prior to that, and explosion of that prana. However, that process can take into infinity, the process of the actual expansion of prana. And that expansion of prana takes this individual body through a profound stages of transformation, inner, basically, reevaluation, all this rewiring, and it culminates in the integration, which then, the final phase of that process is the repose. It's when, so to speak, Kundalini, because it's no longer Kundalini. It's the matter of language again. We are bound by the language, and we use that because that's the word. When we speak properly about this energy, and I spoke about it in the first interview with Rick, Kunda means coiled. So when we say Kundalini, in tantric dialogues proper, in tantric terminology, when we say Kundalini prana, we refer to the prana in its dormant place, or prana which maybe is activated but still coiled within the earthly element, within the Muladhara chakra. But when it manages to leave that center, when it uncoils, it's no longer Kunda, it's no longer Kundalini. It becomes Prana Shakti. So prior to that, it's Prana Kundalini. On awakening and rising, when it uncoils, when it expands, it becomes Prana Shakti. Okay, of course, these are etymological, linguistical, semantics. However, they are subtle, and the language itself becomes bound by trying to articulate this process properly. For instance, when we say that Kundalini rises, right? When we say, we mean the continuous expansion of prana, and it comes a point when the prana reaches the place when it merges with the source, and the repose happens. Many different spiritual traditions speak of that repose. One of them, which I don't want to just go into the depth because it's a very big subject on its own, is that instead of reposing back into the Muladhara, as some traditions, yogic traditions speak about, instead Prana Shakti dives into the heart through the Amrita Nadi, and that where, so to speak, and that what brings to a true death of individuality and mind into the heart. Death here means death of that temporal, let's say, it's the death of individual, in the sense that how that individual cognized himself or herself. Some spiritual teachers say that that is the only true embodiment, that is the only true state of self-realization. Ramana Maharshi spoke about that. Kashmir Shaiva tradition speaks of that. So the process of repose, when the Shakti energy, when the energy is no longer moving anywhere, any centers, in any purification, it descends down into the heart. And from that moment, everything perceived from the heart, everything. It takes us back to the very beginning of this talk, of this webinar, of the true place of the, where the consciousness resides in the physical body. Okay, and I can hear you, I can see you saying here, how to do that, how to bring it back to the heart. You cannot do that. You see, you cannot do that. I cannot do that, in a sense, like, we cannot do that. In fact, some say that even when Kundalini reaches, when prana, awakened prana, reaches cranial regions, when it reaches, let's say, the domain beyond elements, domain beyond Vishuddhi chakra, when it reaches the spheres of the cortexes, this is, from there on, no individual efforts of any value. You simply cannot do anything on your own. It's all up to grace, and grace alone. And there is a lot of truth to that, because anything that prior to that was done through the effort of individuality, because even when Kundalini is awakened, the state of polarity, the state of duality is even more apparent. We often perceive ourselves and perceive that energy as that energy is within me, so that I'm experiencing this awakening. I'm awakened within, but that awakening is with me, and thence the world outside, and I'm here. Here is this duality. And the individuality is very apparent in that state. So the efforts are legitimate. This is why we call it sadhana. We call it sadhana. That's a word that reverberates through many, many traditions. Spiritual practice. After a certain stage, there is no sadhana. Sadhana is finished. You can take as far as you can, and then it's only up to God, so to speak. It's only up to God's grace. You cannot do anything. But that said, because it's always, because this is the nature of consciousness. Because nothing is impossible in consciousness. Everything is very, very beautifully arranged. The degree of inner surrender is paramount to the way that process will come to the final fruition. Degree of the surrender and the acceptance of the entire process. And I know of many aspirants who come to the certain point, and then they constantly have this ongoing battle. They try to break the roof above they try to break the roof. They try, and they think the more force they will imply, the more they'll be able to, but it doesn't work like that. Because there is nowhere to go anywhere from there. It's only what we've talked about before, Because you see, when I spoke about that spontaneous experience of knowing your spiritual heart, it's not like, I'm going to now go and get in touch with my spiritual heart. Who is going to get in touch with the heart? There's no agent. I don't exist outside that experience itself. Do you understand? In the same way here, it happens on its own. So it's like when one is soaked with Shakti, it then naturally spills and flows down. And then the explanation, through the traditional language, it's given that it flows down through a specific channel called Amrita Nadi. And that channel goes from higher cortexes, goes from, that place, the high chakras in the head, and it streams down into the heart. Okay, this is one of the first things I try to relate to those who have direct experience of Kundalini, is that it's like a protocol. The first thing is that Kundalini, it's a little bit like coming to the mirror and looking at yourself. When you look at yourself, who do you see there? You see yourself, isn't it? In the same way, when you perceive Kundalini, when we say Kundalini, it is nothing but your innermost self. It is the ultimate expression of yourself on the psyche-physiological level. Kundalini, it's the, let's say, if your whole being, right, is being sustained and kept together by prana. But Kundalini is the essence of that prana. Kundalini is the supreme heart of that prana in the body. So when that is becoming self-actualizing itself, when that is awakened to itself, is that it's not that something happening in you. This is what many seekers, this is what many experience, those who undergo Kundalini, they somehow form a relationship with Kundalini, which is fine. It is beautiful and necessary, because that, what we experience, the witness registers all these experiences. So obviously I'm experiencing Kundalini. But the thread, the necessary understanding, the proper understanding is that it is your innermost self actualizing itself on that level, on the energetic level. And that is a proper relationship. It's not that something happening to you, it's you happening to yourself. Where that little self, that is, that self from the lowercase, is still has a grip on the self from the capital S, and that grip is still there, creates that tension. But Kundalini will eventually eat you up. That's ultimately what the Shakti's energy is all about. It has to swallow, it has to gulp down, it has to literally digest everything that stands there on her way, in order for you to transcend your personality and individuality and become one with that energy. From that moment, you will not even, when that happens, usually people stop talking about Kundalini. Stop talking in what sense? They stop talking, and even if they talk, it's in a reluctant way. It's not like something you want to talk about. Yeah, of course, sometimes to someone who haven't had that experience, you may have to use language to convey that. But when you're left on your own, there's no anymore subject-object. Hence, that's the key to understand that when I read your question again, is the surrender possible even after Kundalini has subsided? Once Kundalini has subsided, it's either subsided in the heart completing her journey, which means you completely regained who you are, or it subsided back to the stations where it feels appropriate at the current stage of evolution. So, and the next question, does the surrender needs to happen while Kundalini is expressing? There is no such thing where the surrender needs to happen. When I talk about surrender, it's inevitable. It's not something that you cannot cultivate surrender. Yeah, maybe you can. Maybe, you can try to create situations and conditions whereby you allow yourself to express more of that. But essentially speaking, surrender, it's self-evident. It's something that Kundalini herself brings out of ourselves. The true surrender, in fact, very hard to cultivate. The true surrender, it's like, it's like love. Can you love someone logically speaking? I ought to love so-and-so because he or she is so-and-so to me. I ought to love her or him. No, it doesn't work like that. You love regardlessly. In fact, you cannot help it. In fact, there may be some reasons not to love that person. There may be like, I'll be better off not to. In the same way with surrender. Surrender is a spontaneous process. Surrender, it's something which, it's the level of the heart purified enough to see in greater clarity. And in that it is being inbound and filled with humility, and then that spills as a surrender. It's a natural process.